Well, hi, welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Raven. Our guests today are Felice Ekelman, an employment lawyer, and Julie Kantor, a business psychologist and executive coach. They are authors together of the new book, Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace, Step-by-Step Guidance from the Experts. So before I tell you a little bit more about Julie and Felice, welcome to the podcast. How are you both doing today?
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about the book, and we're going to hear your favorite mistake stories. But Julie P. Kantor, Ph.D., again, a business psychologist, executive coach, advisor, and founder of JP Kantor Consulting. She's a regular contributor to Forbes on leadership and employee engagement. She's coming to us from New York City, as is Felice B. Ekelman, JD. She's a principal of Jackson Lewis PC, where she practices employment law. Felice has been quoted in Bloomberg News, the Wall Street Journal, Lexology, and Law 360. So we didn't exactly flip a coin, but we're trying to think whose favorite mistake story goes first. I think, Julie, I'm going to direct the question to you. What would you say is your favorite mistake?
First of all, it was an interesting reflection, and I actually went back to relatively early in my career. I was working at an employee assistance program, which, for those of you who don't know, is basically an external program. It's changed over time, but really where it's prepaid benefit that employers are providing for employees, which are becoming more important now, given this integration of work and home and the challenges of hybrid work. But back then I was an employee, is the operational word here. I was an account manager for a couple of major financial institutions. And over time, I was relatively young in my career, I started building out their consulting division. And I was having a really good time and feeling quite comfortable in my position that I was an employee, having a regular paycheck and sort of riding it out and not appreciating what the business end. I think that's really the lesson learned, in that I was building out, there was a small startup at the time. I was building out a division that hadn't existed, quite honestly, that wasn't necessarily their initial ask of what their initial proposal of their business. It was doing very well, and I was relatively low on the totem pole, but I saw enough of the financials to see that the amount of money that I was bringing in for a project was literally, I think it was 4 times my annual salary.
Yeah.
And I was doing this for quite a while. And honestly, it took me a while to have the confidence and the knowledge to leave. And I think my mistake was staying as long as I did. And I will tell you that it wasn't actually, I wish I could tell you it was just the maturity of me realizing, take the leap, Julie, be on your own, start the business, financially, obviously it's a risk to go from a regular paycheck to, as someone once said to me, when you own your own business, the good news is you control everything. The bad news is you control everything.
Right.
But the last thing, and I think this is why I raise this, because it's a poignant story. I went to the managing partner again. I was relatively junior, and I presented this pretty, basic proposal. It was 2 pages, and the first page was all the specifics of what the services were, the deliverables, et cetera, et cetera. And I turned the page over, and the operational word is a he, and he said to me, "Well, what's this?" And I said, because I had presented the whole proposal. And he said, "What's this?" And I said, "Well, this is the information we need to collect to see if we're going to make money on it." Because again, I was getting exposed to the finances, and hello, as little junior associate, I was seeing it. And his words to me were, and I quote, "Don't worry your pretty little head about that. That's my job."
Yikes.
And that, between it being too long and, me, again, sort of all these factors that were coming together, it was enough to say, take the risk.
Yeah.
So my message perhaps was leave earlier even if you weren't going to get that told to you.
Wow. So in terms of timeframes, Julie, and thank you for sharing that with us. How long was that time period inside building this practice for your employer, and how long was it when you were wondering or thinking, I'd like to leave, I should leave, even if you didn't feel yet like you could?
The time of me thinking of it was pretty early because it was after my first project.
Well, you saw the financials.
But I saw the financials, and again, I saw then I don't remember what they were, but I think they were literally 4 times for a project that I marketed, developed, and delivered. So it was relatively on, and so I just kept building it. My guess, it was about 1.5 years of continuing to do this and seeing the business grow. Again, so I was seeing the financials repeating. It's just like, and I was relatively young. I was in my early 30s, and I was just, thinking about all the things I could be buying.
Yeah. And I mean, what you experience isn't uncommon. I've been a consultant as an employee for organizations, and you see the multiple of what they're billing the client versus what you're getting paid. And you're like, okay, sure, there's some overhead, but it's kind of an eye-popping number. I eventually had an opportunity to go independent as well. So I mean, I don't think that company that was uniquely sticking it to you there, but I recognize, I appreciate you recognizing the opportunity to go independent. But was it that inappropriate comment where you thought, to quote a song of a different era, take this job and shove it?
I mean, I think it was the comment was just really the final straw. I think it was building the confidence to do it. I think it was, I'm probably inherently not a risk taker. That was part of it. Quite honestly, I am a clinical psychologist, so I had enough private practice business, so I wasn't going to go from 0 to nothing. And so there's obviously a financial component of when you're moving. And the other reality is that my spouse was taking care of the mortgage. So I appreciate these are realities. You don't need nothing. So they clearly were all part of, I think, the building of it. And you raised a really good point in terms of this issue of transparency. And I will tell you, my own business, when I have colleagues work for me, I basically bring in folks under 1099. I'm really transparent about the division of the income of what I'm receiving and what they are. I'm really transparent about it.
Yeah. And Felice, I'm not asking you to go back in time and advise Julie on her specific case, but just general question for you of hearing Julie's story. What's your reaction? And in particular, if somebody is leaving a company to start a business that in a way would be competing with that business, or are there risks or things to worry about?
It depends on a whole lot. Is your business one that has to be scalable so that you really can't go at it alone from the beginning? You need some partners or some colleagues to work with you. Do you have the stomach for the financial risk? Because that's a big part of it. And frankly, like Julie, I'm not much of a risk taker. When I've gone to Las Vegas for work, I still have never even put a coin in a slot machine because, I'd rather get something for my money than just throw it away. So I had thought about my mistake as well. And I don't know if you want me to lunge into it, but it's really kind of the counterpoint of Julie. So she described sort of a coming of age realization early in her career. My thought was to talk about a recent mistake in the sense that I'm, many decades into my career. And just to give a little more background, I am a management side labor and employment attorney, and I have been at Jackson Lewis my entire career. And it is extraordinarily unusual in today's day and age to, as a lawyer in private practice, to have, one firm association. And, that happened for a bunch of different reasons. Number one, I found a place that was supportive, and I have been able to grow my business and be a leader both within the firm as well as a thought leader outside of the firm. But it wasn't until, but I'm dated. So I'm dated in the sense that, like Julie, I had children at a fairly young age, early in my career, and, struggled with what we now call work-life balance. That didn't exist as a term of art. And it was, a heck of a lot easier to just stay put, frankly, where I was a known quantity and where I had the support that I needed. Today, we would not call the support that I had support, but a lot more is expected of employers today than decades ago. But let me get to my point. Mm-hmm. I had never heard the term personal brand until very recently. And when I finally began to understand what personal brand meant, I realized my biggest mistake was not thinking about developing a personal brand from the beginning of my career. My career was subsumed in my employer. Obviously now I'm a partner. I've been a partner for a very long time. We call ourselves principals, but it's the same thing. I'm an owner and have been for many decades. But I have really never thought of this concept. And I think for professionals, it's extraordinarily important to start thinking about your personal brand from the get-go.
So what opened your eyes to that, Felice, that kind of made you think, well, in hindsight, this was a mistake?
I had never participated in any kind of women's support network. And I had joined a women's support network organization a number of years ago that was for leaders. And everyone was talking about this thing called personal brand. And I had never heard of it. It took me a while to understand what it means. And I would say it was only in the last couple of years that I have come to understand how important it is for new professionals, particularly since most professionals don't stick around in one job, maybe don't even stick around in one career. Might move from industry to industry, might move to different positions or areas of expertise within an industry. And it's important to define yourself and your personal journey, your personal professional journey. And that was a mistake, but I think I don't think it's fatal.
Well, clearly not. With your success and the firm's success. So it's funny, you talk about personal branding. Tom Peters, the legendary leadership management consultant, he's been a guest on this podcast. He wrote a book just over 25 years ago called The Brand Called You. I think he was one of the people really popularizing or spreading that idea. So, Felice, I'm curious, like, as you've thought about this now, and you're representing yourself as a author, you have your book out together here. What would you say your brand represents, and how closely does that have to align to the brand of your firm as an owner and a principal?
Well, they have to be consistent. I think you'd have a hard time fitting in an organization if it was not consistent. But there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room to personalize what you do and how you do it. So I think my personal brand is to really support clients and to be a problem solver. And when I look back on my career, I have been working with some clients for more than 30 years. And there are some organizations where I'm the person with the most seniority, even though I'm the outside lawyer. And really understanding your role and then explaining it to clients and prospective clients why you're different and why you're different. You're going to bring a different kind of counsel to them, because there are lots of management side employment lawyers out there, and one has to distinguish oneself. And I think the personal brand is part of the way one can do that. And I'm sure that's the case in any industry. Certainly for consultants and the like, but for any leader, they have to be self-aware enough to understand how their leadership and how their thought process makes them a different kind of advisor. So Julie is suggesting that I talk a little bit about what I do. And as a management side employment lawyer, obviously I defend litigation against companies brought by employees. I provide management training. I help with policy development. I also have a traditional labor law practice where I represent employers whose employees are represented by unions. And I help employers be better employers. I think that's one way to look at it. And one of the reasons why this book has been a joy for both Julia and I, Getting to Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace, is because we really wrote it as a how-to guide to help leaders lead better. And, we are at a moment where there's a lot going on in the world of work in the United States. We have 5 different generations of employees working in the same place. That is crazy. And that brings a whole host of new challenges. We have an incredibly diverse workplace. Again, brings new challenges. And we have changing technology, which also provides so many opportunities, but also creates new challenges. And flexible work arrangements, and that's what hybrid work is. Hybrid work is a flexible approach to white-collar work. Is really just a flexible work arrangement that is a product of all of these different forces and changes. And so when Julie and I had the opportunity to put this book together, we really wanted to make it user-friendly. She focused on some areas, I focused on others, but the one constant is that at the end of every chapter or every, meaty discussion, we have a list of, specific action items for leaders. And so what we wanted this book to be is not just something you read from beginning to end, but we wanted it to be a resource so that leaders could pick it up, go to chapter 5 on culture, or I'm sorry, that's not the chapter, but go to the chapter on culture, go to the chapter on ESG, go to the chapter on policy writing, and read it.
And so maybe turn to Julie here. I'd love to hear the story of how the two of you came to co-author the book and how that came to be. Has Felice talked with you, Julie, about personal brand, and what have you thought about what that means for you? What does that mean for the two of you together working toward a book? Because I think Felice summarized real well. Brand is not the logo and the colors. It's what you represent or what people think of you in a way.
Yeah, I was trying to get Felice, because she's actually being pretty modest when she was talking about her brand, and I was trying to get her to give an example. But I will tell you how it came together, and it will share to you what Felice's brand is. And it's actually, Felice and I have actually known each other for 2 decades, Felice, probably.
About that.
Professionally, we weren't friends. We were friendly. I think we went to lunch a couple of times. And our work, we were not regularly together. We were regularly together. But what happened was there were periods of time, because I'm working with businesses And I generally work with leadership teams or individual leaders, helping them be more effective. I'll be generically, right? And Felice is generally going in organizationally when there's a larger issue and when there's a problem. Again, we talk about, I'm there to grow. Felice is there to, for levels of when there's risk.
Risk avoidance.
Risk avoidance, thank you. And so over time, over the years, the reason we would refer back to each other, one is I was working with each other, and it was generally, I'm sorry, a man who was harassing a woman, and the company started getting into legal problems. And, it starts out as a small performance problem, and then you have a woman make a complaint, and I call Felice, and then hand it over to Felice, and it becomes an issue in terms of them dealing with risk.
Right.
In contrast, Felice has called me with an issue when she's dealing with a larger company, and it turns out that there's one person who is creating culture that is a hostile work environment, or where there's a culture where there's an individual harassment, and she would call me. So what happened during when we went into lockdown, we a mutual colleague of ours who's an HR person at a book publisher, she actually reached out to the two of us to write a book on work from home, and we started writing it. And this is significant. We were writing it in March of 2020 when we were in lockdown, and we were all working from home.
Right.
And the publisher pulled the book. And the fact is, he should have pulled the book, because we were working from home for 100% of white collars were, but that wasn't. And so it was actually, so we started problem solving about this as hybrid was working. And Felice and I were talking about what we were seeing. And that is where we came to the fact of, well, you could approach hybrid just from the legal challenges, or you could approach just from the leadership challenges of growth. It would make sense to create one-stop shopping. And so we wrote the book during COVID. We literally did not see each other because it was during COVID, during the writing of the book.
Right.
But going back to where I say in terms of Felice and her brand that she was modest about, if I just heard about her describing the way that she would describe an interest and knowledge of an individual, right? When Felice goes in, she's talking with an entire union. I mean, she's generally dealing with organization, they're big organizations, they're big unions that you and I know about, that Felice is, negotiating. This is big stuff. And the fact that she is aware to both the bigger picture of how things are going, as well as the individual, and seeing what's going on to them, that is unusual. And Felice, we found, and I just said this to each other, but if I had to pick Felice's brand, that's it. If I had to describe my own brand, I take being competent and delivering high-level competence to my clients very seriously.
Yeah.
And one of my lines is, I don't take myself seriously, but I take my work very seriously.
That's great. And I've heard people say, like, you can try as an individual or maybe as an organization to say, here's what we think our brand represents. But really, I've heard people say, it's really what other people say. Like, you could be fooling yourself about, well, we think our brand, a company, we stand for excellence and innovation. Well, really what matters is what your customers or the marketplace, if they disagree, your brand is what people think it is. So it's nice to hear, Julie, your articulation of what Felice's brand represents.
And I would say we actually talk about that exact fact in Mark in the book. We use the language in terms of value proposition, that, you can say you're really work family friendly, but again, it's exactly the same thing. Work friendly ultimately boils down to, does your leader email you at 3 a.m. and expect an email back at 3:30? So, we talk, then we have very specific examples of these value, you can call them value propositions, missions, values, strategy. It ultimately boils down to exactly what you said about people are what they say. And there are specific examples in the book about that.
And the book is focused on helping leaders create organizations that are employers of choice. So what's an employer of choice? It's a company people want to work for. Why? Because what they do is important, how they do it is recognized as positive, and they recognize the importance of their employees. So, I speak to a lot of leaders and HR folks and leaders. And last week I was outside of Chicago speaking to a group of leaders in the manufacturing industry. And we talked a lot about being an employer of choice. And one of the things we talk about in the book is take a look at your mission statement. Most employers, most companies have created this thing called a mission statement. And if your mission statement does not mention your employees, maybe you should rethink it.
Right. Yeah. And there's also then that, I think, that category of where companies say something about the employees, but it doesn't really reflect reality.
Well, that's a problem.
I'm not sure which is a bigger problem of not saying it or saying it and meaning it. But when you think about mistakes that leaders or organizations might make in hybrid workplace environments, I think it's fascinating, the combination of your background. So let me ask it this way. Like, what are some mistakes that might lead to a leader needing coaching and counseling? And which are the mistakes that might get them sued?
That's a good question.
That's
so Julie, I don't know, maybe the question of what would require counseling or coaching directed toward you?
I think that's a really good question. One of the things I say is I had a job as, coaching leaders and executives before COVID, and now they need coaching on steroids because, one of the words we talk about in the book is intentionality, that leaders need to think about things. They just don't know how to think. And, a big part of it is, I would say, what is building culture? Which includes, right, this amorphous thing. What happens when people are not in the room and what they say? How are they pulling together? How are they communicating? And most leaders now don't appreciate the work they have to do and how to do it to pull a team together, to communicate, to collaborate. A lot of the conversations today are we in 2 days a week versus 3 days a week? And I have come to say that it's just a silly question. Because if the three of us work together and you're in on Mondays and I'm in on Tuesdays and Felice is on Wednesdays, there's no purpose for any of us being in the office. And so what leaders really need is the issue of what's the purpose of, them being in the office. So I have an example that I had, and Felice is going to be able to turn over to what she would, how she'd handle it. So I'm working with the head of equity at one of the major banks. And during COVID, during sales, they all had to work from home. And so COVID ended and they wanted somebody to come back. And there was one salesperson who was very effective, didn't want to come back. And the level of decision, and again, Felice can talk about this, of where the decision is made. The level of decision in this bank was at the top, and it was mandated that they could take off. They had to be in the office 8 days a month. They had one person, she had one person, this top salesperson, who was refusing to come into the office
at all. Not
at all.
Yeah.
At all. And the interesting thing was the head of the organization was willing to make the exception. Now, this is sitting again in my camp, right? Was willing to make the exception. He's a talented, and from a leadership standpoint, he said, I don't want to set this example for the rest of my team. I can survive financially. It's for $1 million+ of lost revenue. What I can't do is survive from a standpoint of, the culture impact.
Yeah.
And so it was a big issue of who was going to write who. So I will turn it to Felice to say what would happen if, in fact, the head of the organization won, and they let this guy be an exception. And I think this will hand you into where where it could potentially somebody would call Felice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about in the book extensively is creating a policy. And while certainly leaders in the C-suite have to endorse the policy, they need to have buy-in from everyone, and everyone on the management team has to recognize that whatever the policy is makes sense and is in the best interest of the organization. And I've been talking a lot to clients about resetting their hybrid or flexible work policies, because many came out with a policy, in 2022 that's really not supporting growth and creation of a workplace where they can attract and retain talent. So one of the issues that comes up a lot is, how do you make exceptions to a policy? Should a policy have room for exceptions? And here I'm going to get a little legal. There are two kinds of exceptions. One, for accommodations that are required by law, and you do have to accommodate employees based on disability, which can be physical or emotional, mental, or exceptions based on religion. And so those two types of exceptions are accommodations, legally required accommodations.
Right.
All the other exceptions, which I'll call deal making, are problematic, because you're creating, every time you make an exception to a rule, you're creating an inconsistency. And when you create inconsistency in how you treat employees, you're setting the stage for someone to complain that the inconsistency is in itself evidence of an unlawful practice. So let's say there were two people, and one is a man, one is a woman, and one asked for not an accommodation, but a side deal to not report to work as often as the policy requires. And the man's request is granted, and the woman's request is not granted. Based solely on these facts, what's the distinguishing factor? Gender. So that is how policy making, when it's not well thought out and when it's not adhered to properly because of the absence of consistent buy-in, can lead to disgruntled employees and possibly litigation.
And how did that settle out then? Did the organization say, well, we've got to let that salesperson go, or because of the precedent and or legal risk?
For me?
Yeah.
Yes. What happened in your case, Julie?
No, the head of equity prevailed. The head of equity prevailed. So he had basically the tit for tat. The challenge was between him and his boss, because he was not willing. He had a good culture in his team. And he was not willing to, and he was the one who said, it was actually I was trying to blend it. It was actually without the name. He was not willing to cost the culture and what it would be in his team, and he was willing to give up the revenue of one person. It was a huge statement.
Interesting.
And not everybody made the right decision, right?
Well, that's why I fed it over to Felice, because had he not, he would have been in the position where somebody would be calling her.
Interesting. Wow. So with all these new challenges, and again, the book written by Julie Kantor and Felice Ekelman is Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace, step-by-step guidance from the experts. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, one thing you touch on in the book is, old biases to look out for, and maybe, new, any bias is bad, but are there certain holdover biases that would lead to mistakes or prevent somebody from thriving, when they're trying to design or manage this hybrid workplace now? What do you mean by biases here?
Well, the one that comes to light that's the most obvious one is called proximity bias. And that is simply the intentional or unintentional act of favoring folks who are closer to you physically. So early on, as employees were making their way back to work, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that we cite to in the book about how to make the most of proximity bias and game the hybrid system by getting ahead faster. And how do you do that? You show up every day in the office when no one else is there to demonstrate that you're there the most, to show that you're the most committed, and more importantly, to be there in case an opportunity should arise. So the best example I can think of for proximity bias is I'm in my office today. It's Friday, by the way. Almost no one's here. But there are a couple of junior attorneys who are here today. I could be getting a phone call from a prospective client, and I want to get a junior attorney involved in this new opportunity. Instead of, texting or emailing or Teams calling another associate, I can just grab one of the folks that I saw on my way to the ladies' room before we began recording, pull that person in because they happen to be there.
Yeah. And so then what kind of legal risk does that open up at some point? Is it legal risk then if there's people claim favoritism or discrimination?
Well, it could be legal risk if all employees have the right to work on a hybrid basis, and if most again, I'm going to oversimplify this example, and then let's just make this a gender claim again. Women take advantage of the hybrid opportunity because they tend to be caregivers more often, and men don't bother because they can come to work more readily because they don't have caregiving responsibilities. Right. Okay. And, as a result of proximity bias over and over again, opportunities can fall disproportionately in favor of the men who are in the office more. Again, I'm just giving you a broad brush about how proximity bias can create situations that feel unfair. The other thing is, if these opportunities lead to visibility in an organization, growth and development as a professional, then the women in my example are not having the same opportunities to grow professionally, and perhaps will not do as well when it comes to promotional opportunities.
And so even if the decision making, even in your case, you see someone on the way to or even in the ladies' room and you pass along that opportunity, like the decisions are not being made consciously on a gender basis, is it fair to say then, well, look at the outcome, at least it provides appearance, and does that then become a case you might lose?
Whether decisions are unlawful is a long way off. Most employers don't ever want to have decision-making viewed from a legal standpoint. They only want to have their decisions viewed from a fairness standpoint. And, creating an environment that feels unfair is not good for an organization because you lose people, you can't attract people. The cost of training and developing talent is very, very high. So, Julie, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I was going to say, so, Felice and I have talked about this issue of proximity bias in terms of like legally. And I said, the reality is exactly what she said. She's going to walk down and get somebody. And one of the things, that I've been working with leaders, and you ask sort of this thing in terms of history and changing, right? And what are the old ways that are hard? One of the things that you see, and this is generationally, right? That, especially young generations who have not experienced a 5-day work week. They literally, their first 2 years of work, they were working at home, and they haven't had what I call the commodity of being in the office 5 days a week, where you build at work, family, and there's some predictability. There is commodity there. And so you have the difference between, leaders who are older and they expect employees to be in the office, and they don't appreciate exactly what Felice said. Also, this issue, which I talk a lot about in the book, in terms of connection. that, again, in the past, you didn't have to think about it. Where now, if we're working together and I have my phone, have my video off every single time, and you need it to be an issue, you have a question, even this, you could call Felice. And things that, in terms of coaching leaders, is helping them learn how to, basically I help leaders be better leaders, right? And how do they work to coach their folks to do these things? I think a lot of things in terms of this change of, sort of the old ways is the difference in the appreciation that we need to think about how we communicate. We have many different, it used to be we were all in the office. We didn't have to think about it, right? You didn't, you'd have to send an email, you walk down, and now I can't sit in my email. I mean, I know people who literally, they're emailing people literally back and forth because I don't have to get up.
Yeah.
So now there are so many different modes of communications, and there's a variation that leaders have to think about, and that in terms of, again, they didn't have to use to think about it. And there's a gap between even just email and Slack that most younger folks prefer to have their Slack channels as backed, as complex as older folks' email channels. And leaders, in terms of changing from the old ways, leaders have to create that bridge. And one of the things I talk about in the book, and one of the sections that I put in there, is I call the communication charter. Let's sit down and talk about, when you have these kinds of things, you put it in a Slack. When you have these kinds of things, it's an IM. When you have these kinds of things, it's an email. When these kinds of things, it's can be like, talk about those and create some standards. So so communication is a big thing that sort of this old way, and then you add on top of that the generational changes.
Yeah, and I still get confused personally. Well, I'm 50 and I do a lot of work with a tech company, people who are 20 years younger, and I still don't understand sometimes, why are they doing Slack? And so we already had email, but I'm showing
Have you ever asked them sometimes to screen share with you the list and see their Slack channels? It is incredible.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not saying the problem is them. It's just me trying to adapt and adjust. And we also had text messages, and so and sometimes people will use all three channels within the same day. So
right, exactly. And which are they using? And sometimes you have people who don't read their emails. I have working with some, and they say, you haven't been at the meeting. He says, I don't know. He says, I sent you an email. So I don't read my emails.
That's hard.
Okay.
It's hard to imagine, but there we go. So we have all these changes, and maybe a final question for you both. You're describing what has been happening and what's happening now. Where do you think this is headed? This seems like there's more and more headlines about, nope, hybrid remote time is done, going back to office, got to come back in. Are things moving in a consistent direction toward more hybrid workplaces, or is it going to be more of a pendulum?
I'll take this one first, Julie. I'll go out on a limb, and I have been saying flexible work arrangements are here to stay. Hybrid work is one of them, because that can include teams where there are folks who are remote, who never come to an office, teams where there are employees who report to an office every day, and teams where there are employees who report to an office some but not all of the time. So I do think flexible work arrangements are here to stay. I think we're going to see more flexibility around the 4-day work week. I think we're going to continue to see this evolve, but I think hybrid work and understanding the challenges of hybrid work and learning how to lead in a hybrid workplace is going to make a leader a better leader as we look at more technology, as we look at more pressure for employers to be flexible in order to attract and retain talent. So I think the skills that we discuss in the book are skills that leaders will find helpful today and into the future.
It's a great closing argument, Felice. Well,
Yeah.
That's what I do for a living.
but Julie, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this?
There's no doubt it's here to stay. That hybrid's here to stay. I think the piece of what is open is what are the different hybrid models. And again, the first chapter of the book is about all the different hybrid models. So what's gone is people going into the office metaphorically 5 days a week, because most people have longer days than that.
Yeah.
But that is gone, and it's gone for a number of reasons. Number one, people have realized, maybe we shouldn't be working all the time and get some flexibility and get home to, family members. There is a lot of value to that. Technology has also made that a possibility. If this was, the 1950s, we couldn't have this conversation.
Right.
Because you just didn't have that top, so I think the cat is out of the bag. I will tell you another way that I really believe this is that I have a number of large architecture firms who build the likes of the tallest buildings. The point being, the buildings they're designing today, people are going to walk into in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So at some degree, they are predicting the future. And I will
Right.
tell you, they are all planning their buildings based on the premise of what you have to do and why. Because what has changed with hybrid is, initially with hybrid, we brought work home. And now employers need to bring homework. And they are saying that is what's here to stay, this integration. And integration on life leads a lot of things in terms of hybrid. So there's no doubt it's changing. The only question is, what kind of hybrid are you going to have as an organization?
Yeah. And using that to thrive.
Right.
Felice, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, Mark, your listeners can find Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And we have a website called Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace. We would love any feedback or thoughts that you have about the content, because Julie and I are living and breathing this every day, and we are always interested in getting feedback from readers.
Well, I'll put links to all of that in the show notes, and I hope people will check out the book. Again, Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace, step-by-step guidance from the experts, Felice Ekelman and Julie Kantor. Thank you both for being here today, for sharing your story and having a great conversation about this.
Thanks for talking with you. It's great speaking with you.
Thank you, Mark.